Hey, what's up guys? I've tested 25 games on the Lenovo Legion GO in at least 2 resolutions and 2 different graphical settings, resulting in a total of 114 benchmarks. For this I used the BIOS version 23 and a VRAM setting of 4GB as well as the newest available drivers by AMD. All games have been tested at the custom 30W mode plugged in for maximum performance. Also make sure to stick with me until the end of the video, where I also mention some games that didn't work out like at all for me. But first, let's have a quick message from the sponsor of today's video.
scdkey.com is your trustworthy key shop for software keys like official Windows 10 Pro OEM keys, as well as game keys for Steam, Origin, Uplay and much more. With my special coupon code HUB, you will even get a 25% discount on top. Just create a free account on scdkey.com, search for Windows 10 Pro and pick the Windows 10 Pro OEM key, which you can also use to activate Windows 11. And you can also upgrade to Windows 11 later if you're currently using Windows 10. Don't forget to use the coupon code HUB on checkout for a 25% discount and reduce the price to only $16.42. You will receive the code within minutes after your transaction. To activate your newly received key, just press your Windows key on your keyboard and type activation into the search field. Click on activation settings and here you can check your activation status or enter a key if it's not activated yet. If you're planning on buying more software in the future, make sure to check out the SCDKey membership card to save even more on future transactions.
Now usually I record gameplay and show this to you, but since most of you would prefer to see the results for various resolutions and graphic settings, I chose to only quickly show you how I actually benched the videos and then collected the results in diagrams this time. Now the games aren't following any specific order, but for you to find your favorite games more quickly, you could use the timeline. Though, by the way, don't forget to like the video as well as subscribing to the channel for more Lenovo Legion GO and gaming laptop content. And now let's just start with these benchmarks.
Alright, and the first game of today is Assassin's Creed Valhalla, for which I was using the integrated benchmark tool. It is pretty playable on 800p and low settings with up to 82 FPS on average and pretty decent 1% lows of 54 FPS. Now for 1200p and 1600p I was using FSR on performance mode, which despite only being FSR 1 looks pretty good on the Legion GO compared to a bigger desktop monitor. Though the 1% lows have been pretty disappointing on medium settings for the higher resolutions for sure, causing quite some stuttering. In Hogwarts Legacy, I was using a pretty long run from some classroom in Hogwarts through the castle and all the way down to Hogsmeade. Though this game still is a bit problematic since it wouldn't pre-cache the shaders like it should, no matter the VRAM settings, resulting in severe stuttering if you enter an area for the first time in every gaming session. Made me run around a bit before actually recording the benchmarks, but still resulted in some of today's worst frame times and noticeable stuttering here and there. I was also using FSR 2.0 on performance for this game. And as you can see, only 800p and low settings were really playable. Though keep in mind that the 1% lows should really become better if you play for a little longer. I also hope that Lenovo or the game's developers will somehow fix the issue of the shaders not pre-caching correctly. For testing Starfield, I was using a predefined walk in the first city you'll enter. And to get the game running correctly, you might need to install the newest drivers available with the help of a workaround, since otherwise the FPS can really be low. So I was using FSR with a resolution scaling of 50% for all tests, and at least saw playable FPS at 800p if you consider 30 to 45 FPS playable. I mean, the game's optimization is really bad as of now, to be honest, so let's just have a look at the next game. For Baldurs Gate 3, I was walking through the city in Act 3 for a while. The game does work if you're using FSR, but it's not working great overall. The maximum I was able to get while using 800p and all low settings with FSR activated on performance was only 39 FPS on average and 25 FPS for the 1% low. 1600p is doable as well if you're using the low settings. Though the FPS really depend on the progress you made in the game, so it's a bit hard to benchmark it overall. I was using the integrated benchmark for Cyberpunk 2077 in both 800 and 1600p, and you can get an average of 61 FPS on 800p using the lowest settings, and that even without using FSR. For 1600p I was using FSR though, which resulted in 43 FPS on average for the low preset and 36 FPS on average for the medium preset. But overall it is definitely playable even on medium settings and even on the higher resolutions if you think around a bit and don't always expect 60 FPS straight. So it actually kind of runs better than The Witcher 3 since its next gen update, which is sad. And speaking of, in The Witcher 3 I was using my usual benchmark run in Toussaint, which resulted in disappointing 41 FPS on average at 800p with low settings. But that really is the game's fault here, or the developer's fault to be precise, as the used DirectX 12 wrapper is just utterly bad. I was not able to get over 60 FPS in that game with the settings that I used, so you really might want to try installing an older version of this game if you can, or use the DirectX 11 version. It will run much faster. I used the integrated benchmark for Forza Motorsport and got some mixed result with a bit disappointing 1% lows, meaning there is some stuttering and frame times aren't that good in some cases. And you don't really want stuttering in racing games, right? So at 800p and low settings using FSR performance mode as kind of a benchmark for the maximum possible FPS, I was able to get 56 FPS on average with a 1% low of 33 FPS. I didn't try out 1600p here as it just didn't seem to make much sense to me. Forza Horizon 5 is really running well on the Legion GO, and I used a decent integrated benchmark to test it. Almost 100 FPS on average are possible when using the lowest possible combination. And even on 1600p we are getting playable FPS in that case. What my personal recommendation would probably be 1200p with medium settings for the best compromise of performance and visual quality. For Fortnite Battle Royale I was benchmarking the replay of a full match I played on the Legion GO. And at 800p and low settings you can actually get up to 140 FPS on average, so the fast screen actually starts to make sense here. But even medium settings at 1600p in combination with TSR performance are playable here and already start to look really good in terms of graphical fidelity. But I guess that most people would want as many FPS as possible in that case, right? And once more, for the Division 2, I was using the integrated benchmark and saw pretty solid results overall, up to almost 100 FPS for 800p and low settings, and still more than 32 FPS at the highest 1600p with medium settings. Seems to be playable just fine after all, so let's see what's next. The integrated benchmark for Far Cry 6 resulted in a maximum of 75 FPS for 800p and low settings with a 1% low of 59 FPS. So a super stable 60 FPS are actually possible, though even on medium settings and 800p you could achieve that with an average of 66 FPS. And then it goes all the way down to only 30 FPS on 1600p and medium settings. Now, Far Cry 6 offers FSR, but it's implemented in a weird way with no option to choose performance, balance or quality, and it doesn't really push the FPS by that much. For Elden Ring, I was using the same walk through Limgrave all the way up to the castle for each run. Now, as there is an FPS cap in this game by default, we won't get 60 FPS on average if the FPS sometimes drop below 60 FPS, which is why at 800p we are only seeing 56 FPS on average, though it is playable just fine mostly despite the relatively weak 1% low of 34 FPS, meaning there are some FPS drops once in a while. But if you'd be fine with 30 FPS though, you surely have quite a lot of options again for this title. For CSGO 2, I was playing Dust 2 for around 10 minutes on a random online server. The maximum FPS I got at 800p with low settings was 139 on average, with a 1% low of 80 FPS. I have to point out that just like in CSGO 1, the 1% lows are pretty low compared to the average FPS, but you won't notice that. It's just an issue with the engine producing these 1% lows. And I even got above 100 FPS at 1200p and medium settings, though again I guess that most of you would want the maximum possible FPS for good reason. Another game that can actually make use of the fast 144Hz screen of the Lenovo Legion GO. In Valorant, I was getting one of today's highest FPS while playing a whole deathmatch round from beginning to the end. At 800p and low settings, I saw 200 FPS on average and 98 FPS for the 1% lows. Again, another game with pretty weak 1% lows. Though, on the other hand, I still saw a very high 150 FPS on average at 1200p and medium settings. So the engine is clearly holding back the Lenovo Legion GO here for some reason, as there is almost no difference between 800p low and 1200p low. For Overwatch 2, I was playing a custom game against bots on the Nepal map to ensure the most similar gameplay. 161 FPS at 800p with low settings and activated FSR, and a resolution scaling set to 100%. Using 1200p surely has an impact on the performance here with 91 FPS on average at medium settings and 1% lows of 58 FPS. Though overall perfectly playable on the Lenovo Legion GO. For The Last of Us, I was running a custom benchmark walk with a cutscene at the end for each run. It actually seems to work pretty okay with over 60 FPS on average for 800p and low settings thanks to FSR. I also have to point out that the game now looks a lot better on low settings as it did on release. The textures aren't that washed out anymore for sure, and loading the shader cache in the beginning is now much quicker. So if you're into graphical fidelity, even 1200p and medium settings could be an option, as the original PlayStation 3 version was running at only 30 FPS as well. I was using the integrated benchmark for Shadow of the Tomb Raider once more, and at 800p and low settings I saw an average of 76 FPS with a 1% low of 53. Keep in mind that this game also offers a very low preset, which looks really bad though, due to the lack of acceptable shadow and light usage. But here using 1200p is pushing the FPS below 60 for sure. And at 1600p and medium settings it basically becomes unplayable for most people. For World of Warcraft, I was using a predefined walk from Silvermoon to South, since I don't have an active subscription and can't use the newer regions unfortunately. But as you can see, the range of the possible performance is huge and highly depends on the use setting. So I was using the lowest possible preset number 1 at 800p, which resulted in today's highest FPS with 283 on average and pretty high 1% lows. Down right to 57 FPS on average for 1600p and the highest preset, while still remaining playable at least in this area. Though I'm sure that some add-ons, newer areas and raids would further reduce the FPS. But after all, I guess everybody should be able to find a good compromise here. For Apex Legends, I was benchmarking 5 minutes of gameplay for each setting, resulting in the maximum possible FPS of 140 on average with a 1% low of 92 FPS. And even at 1200p and medium settings, I almost got 100 FPS on average. Let me also point out that using 1200p looks really clean and sharp on the Legion GO, despite not even being the native resolution. But most people probably won't notice the difference to 1600p, especially if you're right in the middle of some gameplay action. I expected the Legion GO to kinda ace the integrated benchmark in Rainbow Six Siege and haven't been disappointed. A maximum of 181 FPS on average for the low preset at 800p with a resolution scaling of 100%. And be aware that this game does have a pretty good upscaler in my opinion, so even using a lower resolution scaling does look okay. So even using 1200p would get you around 100 FPS or more, especially if you're making use of that. In God of War, I was using my usual benchmark walk through one of the first levels, and thanks to FSR, this game is very playable and still looks pretty good even on the low preset, really. 69 FPS on average for 800p and the low preset with FSR in performance mode, and still playable 37 FPS at 1600p and medium settings due to FSR with a good 1% low of 31. So overall this game is perfectly playable and ran more stable than most other games. So let's just jump right to the next game. I was also testing the lighter indie game Life is Strange 3 with a walk through the town in Act 2 and saw perfectly playable FPS even on high settings. Solid 81 FPS on average for 800p and low settings, and still pretty decent 52 FPS and 35 for the 1% lows at 1200p and the high preset. And since you don't need a fast reaction in this game, I'd surely choose higher settings to enjoy the graphics the way they were meant to be, really. Alright, let's see what's next. I was using a saved replay for Rocket League, and the game is playable pretty well despite the rather weak 1% lows, which I didn't really seem to notice, as they are so uniformly spread out. I didn't really notice any stuttering here. At 800p and the low preset without AA, I saw a very high 200 FPS on average, and even at 1200p with very high settings I saw playable 85 FPS on average. Again, the 1% lows look worse than they actually are in this game. Lies of P is optimized exceptionally well and ran pretty great thanks to FSR in performance mode. Here I was using a custom walk through level 1 and saw a very high 123 FPS on average for the lowest possible combination of 800p and low settings, while still getting over 60 FPS on high settings at 1200p. Perfectly playable. Probably one of the best titles of today's test, considering its age and the overall performance. So kudos to the developers for this one, really. And before we talk about some games that didn't really work out, let's have a look at the last game for today, which is PUBG, in which I was playing a whole match on the Erangel map. And I actually got decent results for 800p and low settings with an average of 100 FPS and a 1% low of 55 FPS, but as you can already see here, for some reason I did get seldom but very severe stuttering for all the other settings tested. And I double and triple checked this and even reinstalled the game because it was so weird. I was able to play fine for like 99% of the time, getting very long freezes of almost a second once every 1 to 2 minutes.
Alright, and I also wanted to benchmark Warzone, but that dude just crashed on me all the time after a while, and I also experienced some bad stuttering gameplay before that happened, so I don't know if this might be fixed with driver or BIOS updates. Let me know if it works for your device or if it's just me. And Microsoft Flight Simulator just crashed all the time as well. I often wasn't even able to load a flight before it crashed, so meh. And then Red Dead Redemption 2 was basically unbenchable because it has problems with the Legion GO's portrait screen, and I was not able to change resolutions to benchmark them. Which is sad because it is a good game and it would run just fine basically. I also have to point out that to get World of Warcraft running, I had to force it to use DirectX 11 via a code in the Battle.net options menu, because otherwise it wouldn't open the game without crashing on me. And I also wanted to bench FIFA 23, but I wasn't able to activate the FPS overlay. Even the Legion GO's internal overlay won't show any FPS here. But it is absolutely playable, just like FIFA 2022, by the way. I also didn't benchmark the VU emulation with CMU, but it just runs fine. Like, you can basically play all the games that CMU can handle even at 1080p or higher with 60 FPS. Of course, Breath of the Wild always needs tinkering around to get it running in a fine way. Alright, and that's all for today. If you liked the video, please leave a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more Lenovo Legion GO videos, laptop stuff and reviews in the near future. Thanks for watching, see you next time, bye bye and tschüss.